Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janine Yazi, and I am born for the Blackwood Streak people and the Bitterwater clans of the Navajo Nation.
Good evening. I am Karletta Chief. I am of the Bitterwater clan, born for Near the Water clan. This is how we define ourselves as Navajo women.
On August 5th, the image of a yellow river was burned into our collective consciousness, and for good reason. The contamination of a major water resource in our drought-stricken Southwest is no small matter. Yet the devastation and trauma experienced by the Navajo families that live along the 275-mile stretch of the river was largely marginalized or ignored. Imagine waking up one morning to turn on your faucet only to see this yellow sickness coming from your spigot. The experience would be shocking. It may even cause fear, worry, and stress as you try to figure out what happened to your water. This is only a fraction of what the Navajo community experienced as they watched helplessly as their river turned yellow. Suddenly, the only source of water for planting, for prayer, for ceremony, for maintaining their way of life becomes horribly toxic because the EPA accidentally dislodged a plug that released 3 million gallons of acid mine drainage into the Animas River. There's no way to understand how this happened or why no one was prepared, although EPA predicted it. You have no words to explain to your elderly loved ones who only speak Navajo why the river is suddenly toxic and you have to watch your crops die. To make matters worse, the EPA only conducted a recreational risk assessment, which only took into consideration the risk to hikers who drink filtered water from the river. To the Diné reality, this lens is useless. It does not begin to capture the full picture and impact to people who have lived along the river for generations and still depend on it for their everyday lives. These metals, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, and lead, were being deposited on banks where your loved ones still collect water to conduct sweats and use the sediment to rub on their faces for ceremonial cleansing ceremonies, as your ancestors have always done. Lost in all this was the ability to mitigate the impact to the livestock who still graze along the banks of the river and drink the water for survival. No one was looking at the impact to corn, a sacred Navajo staple grown from heirloom seeds that are passed down through families for generations. In the midst of their growing season, just weeks before harvest, the lifeline to these communities was completely cut off, and 700 families lost their crops in what is otherwise a food hub of the Navajo Nation. When a river is contaminated, the full loss cannot be truly quantified, such as the impact to the Diné children who were witness to this cultural, economic, social, and environmental devastation unraveling before them. Imagine your river is made toxic and your nation is not informed until days after that this toxic plume is headed towards your communities. With EPA admitting their fault, no one knows who to turn to trust. When EPA assistance finally does come to your communities, it's in the form of water delivered for crops and livestock in oil-coated tanks. Within 3 weeks of the spill, suicides spike, with 15 Navajos taking their own lives. This wicked problem must serve as a wake-up call for us all if we truly envision a just and sustainable future. In Colorado alone, there are 11,500 abandoned mines threatening our watersheds. And across the U.S., you'd be hard-pressed to find a community or a water source that isn't threatened by the hundreds of thousands of abandoned mines that exist. We need a model for emergency response that facilitates community involvement and research that creates and nurtures self-resiliency and capacity building in the face of this disaster. Because for all people and for all communities, water is life.
Because trust is so important, we have been nurturing our relationship with the Diné people since the spill occurred. We've been listening to their concerns and their needs The community has been the driver for this proposal. The Haury pilot was critical to strengthening this partnership. We held listening sessions, we held teach-in, and our Diné partners came to the university to share their perspectives. The communities also sent soil and water samples with the Navajo Nation president for our analysis. In March, we also received a National Institute of Health grant that is a rapid assessment of the short-term exposure. As a result, we redesigned our proposal with the community. Finally, we had undergraduates come to the Navajo Nation to participate in environmental sampling while having a meaningful cross-cultural experience. The voice of the people came through these listening sessions. They said, "We're scared of the water. It's not clean." They did not trust EPA, and they were concerned about the data not being returned back to them. They were frustrated about the lack of a decision-making protocol, and they were concerned about future impacts on the river. As a result, with the community, we developed a model that is based on the Diné philosophy of Hojon. Hojon means balance, restoration, and healing. Hojon is our project goal. This is a holistic approach focusing on the environmental, health, and social concerns of the people to develop a community response plan that will increase their resiliency to respond to future spills. Our work plan is based on the Diné fundamental philosophy of Sa'a Nagay Bik'e Hojon, which is based on K'e Beda Hinitra, which is our relationship to one another as mothers, daughters, grandfathers, and grandsons, to work together to set aside our political differences and focus on a solution. First is Nsahakes, thinking we will leverage the results of the National Institute of Health to look at long-term exposure and environmental assessments. We will also identify mitigation strategies for future spills, as well as identify the needs of the people. Once we have identified the problem, we will plan, which is Nahata, with the community, with a participatory approach, design a framework to identify a community response plan. Then we'll implement it, which is Ina, where we'll train the community members to implement this design. Finally, we'll wrap up the problem solving with Sihasin, and that is to reflect on the solutions and make improvements. This model is applicable to other communities facing the threats of mine spills into the future. We will disseminate this model through U of A centers who work with 5 states with tribes. This has never been done before, using the Sa'a Nagay Bik'e Hojon to develop a response plan. We're treading on new ground, and we're empowering the community. We have a multidisciplinary set of expertise in each of these areas of environmental, health, and social sciences. In addition, our partners are strategically placed in and around the Navajo Nation. Not only will this provide opportunities for Diné community members and Diné students, but it'll also provide opportunities for U of A faculty and U of A students to work with the tribal community on an environmental injustice issue. We were asked to meet one Haury goal. However, our project meets all of the 8 goals. With over 500,000 mines in the United States, will a spill like this occur? Unfortunately, yes. We are coming together as scientists and community members to empower the community to come together to develop an emergency response plan. With a response plan, communities will be empowered to respond to future spills, to take action for themselves and into the future. Ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.